A year ago, explosions devastated a nuclear plant, turning it into a twisted mess of metal and debris.
Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant says it cannot rule out the possibility that a temporary state of criticality occurred recently in the number 2 reactor. Criticality is when nuclear fission occurs continuously. On Tuesday, Tokyo Electric Power Company detected radioactive substances xenon-133 and xenon-135 in gas near the outlet of a filter in the reactor's containment vessel. The findings suggest that nuclear fission may have occurred recently. That's because xenon is detected when there is nuclear fission. The half-life of xenon-133 is 5 days, and that of xenon-135 is just 9 hours. On Wednesday, TEPCO poured boric acid solution into the number 2 reactor to suppress nuclear fission. The utility says the temperature and pressure in the reactor has basically remained unchanged.
NHK World's Satoru Masuya was in the helicopter when the camera captured the images, and we're going to speak in Japanese with simultaneous interpretation.
Tell us why the no-fly zone was modified.
The Japanese government reduced the no-fly zone around the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant from a radius of 20 kilometers to 3 because it was determined that the radiation dosage in the atmosphere did not pose a problem for safe flying. NHK's helicopter captured images from the skies near the plant for the first time since the accident last March. Now on the screen, we see the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant reactors 1, 2, 3, and 4. The number 3 reactor had a hydrogen explosion and is the most severely damaged. From the mountainside, it is possible to see the ocean through the crumbling wall. The number 4 reactor also had a hydrogen explosion. The yellow is the lid of the outer containment vessel. The containment vessel is designed to prevent radioactive substances from the reactor leaking out, but is now exposed to the outside air. The yellow-green device is the crane above the spent fuel rod pool used to move fuel. At the time of the accident, the number 4 unit was going through a routine inspection and had no fuel in the reactor. The pool below the crane still contains many fuel rods. Now at the west side of the plant property, there are about 1,000 tanks. The tanks contain roughly 120,000 tons of contaminated water that has been treated. When molten fuel caused by the meltdown is cooled with water, contaminated water is generated. Treating this contaminated water is one of the most difficult efforts in the accident cleanup. The space for tanks is limited. How to add more is another issue.
How much radiation was in the air?
When we were about 4 kilometers away from the plant, we were flying at an altitude of 700 to 800 meters. The radiation level was 0.15 microsieverts per hour at the highest. This was marginally higher than the normal average reading before the quake. It was lower than what we had expected.
What did you think when you saw it from above?
I had actually covered the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant prior to the accident. Back then, the reactor facilities were in an orderly layout, and there were even trees on the property. Now, the buildings have been blown apart, and the trees have been cut in order to make room for the tanks. I was speechless at the staggering change. We also flew within the 20-kilometer radius of the power plant. The area in a 20-kilometer radius from the plant is off limits. There are no people in the homes. There are no cars on the road. This is a supermarket parking lot, and you can see that it's empty. To the north of the power plant is Namiya town. Around the port, the devastation from the tsunami remains untouched. Fishing boats grounded on the land have been left abandoned. The baseball field is about 3 kilometers from the power plant. It's being used as a temporary storage ground for removed dirt. There's a plastic sheet on the ground so that the contamination will not spread. The dirt that has been removed is being piled on top of the sheet.
I've seen the impact the nuclear accident had on wider areas. Did anything catch your eye?
Seen from the skies, the homes and the shops are still there. However, there was a thin layer of snow on the ground, and despite that, there were neither footsteps nor tire marks of cars. Within a 20-kilometer radius from the plant, there are no residents or no people at work. It was truly a town without life, and this was stretching across a vast expanse. The gravity of the nuclear power plant accident and the painful struggles of the local Fukushima people struck home with even greater force.
That was Satoru Masuyama for today's Nuclear Watch.
Journalists were given a 1-hour bus tour of the plant, including the Disaster Task Force facility. The bus drove on a road parallel to the coastline. On the right are the turbine buildings for reactors 1 to 4. The radiation level near the number 2 building was 300 microsieverts per hour. Then it rose to 1,500 microsieverts near the number 3 building. Here, reporters were allowed to get off the bus.
I'm standing on a hill about 300 meters south of the number 4 reactor building. The radiation level here is 50 microsieverts per hour. Workers in the plant are exposed to higher levels of radiation.
Some workers were clearing debris on the roof of the number 4 reactor building that was damaged. The work is to prepare for the removal of spent fuel from the storage pool, which will start next year. About 3,000 people work in the plant every day. Some have had to stop working because they had exceeded the radiation safety limit.
The water pumps for cooling the reactors were placed on high ground to protect against tsunamis, but they were placed on the back of a truck, parked outside. Since the state of cold shutdown was announced 2 months ago, there have been 43 water leakages, including from these pumps. One of the reasons for the leakages is freezing. TEPCO has been covering the pumps with sheets and wrapping insulation around the plumbing. Last December, radiation-contaminated water leaked into the ocean from a water treatment facility. Sandbags were piled around this facility, giving the impression that it was very much a band-aid measure. Maintaining and managing these facilities is the great challenge to keeping the reactors cooled and preventing leakages of contaminated water.
I saw many workers in the plant. What are their working conditions?
I saw that it was a very tough work site where workers are being exposed to radiation, which is invisible. I entered the site wearing protective gear and a full face mask. Although it was winter, it was hard to breathe, and after more than an hour dressed like that, I was sweating. 4 workers have died so far of heart attacks and acute leukemia. TEPCO says that there is no correlation between the deaths and radiation exposure. But experts say that the work involves radiation, which is invisible, and radioactive substances, making stress and anxiety levels very high. The work to decommission the reactor is to continue for at least 40 years. Finding enough workers and managing their health, including their psychological care, is indeed a challenge.